The crystal chandelier cast 1,000 fractured stars across the ballroom, but for one woman, the entire glittering universe had just collapsed into a single point of cold, sickening dread. Her name was Flora, and the man she saw across the room was Gregory, her ex-husband. He wasn't just a memory. He was a monument to her failure, standing with his arm draped around a woman who was younger, sleeker, and smiling like she'd just conquered a small country. Flora's breath hitched. Running was her first instinct, hiding was her second. But then, a third, far more dangerous idea sparked in the wreckage of her pride, a reckless, desperate plan that would require a miracle, a lie, and the one man in the room more powerful than her past. The invitation had arrived a week ago, a thick, cream-colored cardstock with embossed gold lettering that felt heavier than its weight. The annual St. Jude's Foundation Gala at the Plaza was the crown jewel of the city's philanthropic calendar, a place where fortunes were pledged and reputations were cemented. For Flora Benson, it felt less like an invitation and more like a summons to her own execution. Her boss, the notoriously private and intensely focused Landry Maxwell, CEO of Maxwell Innovations, was a platinum sponsor. Attendance for his executive staff wasn't just encouraged, it was an unspoken mandate. For the past year, since the divorce, Flora's life had been a meticulous, fragile reconstruction. She'd traded a sprawling suburban home for a shoebox apartment in the city, a country club membership for a well-worn library card, and a marriage for a job as an executive assistant that demanded all her time and paid just enough to keep the wolves of debt from the door. It was an honest life, a quiet life. This gala was the opposite of quiet. It was a roaring bonfire of the life she once had, and she knew, with the certainty of a healed bone aching before a storm, that Gregory Shaw would be there. Her ex-husband hadn't just left her. He had gutted her life, taking the friends, the social standing, and her sense of self-worth in the divorce. He'd told the court she was emotionally unstable and financially irresponsible, painting a picture of a woman incapable of managing her own affairs, all while he'd been the one managing a secret affair with his 24-year-old paralegal, Tiffany Reed. The ink on their divorce decree was barely dry when his engagement photos with Tiffany were splashed across their old friend's social media feeds. Now, she had to face them. The thought alone was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest. What would she wear? The ghosts of designer gowns hung in the back of her memory, but her current closet offered only sensible work blouses and a single, decade-old black dress that screamed, +1, not powerful woman moving on. Who would she talk to? Their entire social circle had sided with Greg, the charming, successful investment banker, over the difficult wife he'd so tragically had to leave. On the Friday before the event, the pressure became unbearable. She was in Mr. Maxwell's office, a sleek, minimalist space on the 50th floor overlooking the city, briefing him on his quarterly logistics reports. Her voice was steady, her presentation flawless, but her mind was a maelstrom of anxiety. "Benson," Mr. Maxwell said, his voice a low baritone that always commanded attention. He wasn't looking at the report anymore. His grey eyes, sharp and unnervingly perceptive, were fixed on her. "Is everything all right?" Landry Maxwell was a man built of quiet intensity. He was probably in his late 30s, with dark hair precisely cut and a jawline that could have been carved from granite. He moved with an economy of motion, spoke with an economy of words, and had built a tech empire on the same principles of ruthless efficiency. He was not a man who engaged in small talk or, for that matter, seemed to notice the emotional states of his employees. The question caught her completely off guard. "Yes, of course, Mr. Maxwell. Everything is fine." He leaned back in his leather chair, the movement slow and deliberate. "You've been distracted all week. You used the projected numbers from Q2 in the Q3 summary, and you scheduled my meeting with the Tokyo board for 3 a.m. their time. Those are not your usual mistakes. So I will ask again. Is everything all right?" Heat flooded her cheeks. Of course he'd noticed. He noticed everything. She couldn't possibly tell him the truth. "My apologies, sir, for my subpar performance, but I'm paralyzed with fear about seeing my ex-husband and his new fiancée at your charity gala. I apologize, sir. It's just a personal matter. It will not affect my work going forward." He studied her for a long moment, his gaze unwavering. It felt like being X-rayed. "The gala tomorrow night," he stated, not asked. "Does your personal matter involve the gala?" She swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. "Yes." He nodded slowly, a single decisive motion. He looked down at his desk, at the embossed invitation sitting in a neat tray. "These events are a necessary evil, a transaction of influence disguised as charity. They are filled with people I have little desire to speak to. But they are important." He paused, tapping a long finger on the corner of the card. "Go home, Benson. Get some rest. I expect you to be at your best tomorrow night. My driver will pick you up at 7. It was a dismissal, a clear order to get her head straight. Flora felt a fresh wave of humiliation as she gathered her tablet and retreated from his office, her own problems feeling pathetically small in the shadow of his corporate empire. She spent the rest of the day in a fog, the hours ticking down like a bomb. She went home, pulled out the old black dress, and stared at her reflection, seeing not a survivor, but a ghost about to haunt the scene of her own demise. At this point, just surviving the night felt like an impossible task. Little did she know, survival was about to become the least of her concerns. Saturday arrived with a cold, persistent drizzle that mirrored Flora's mood. She spent the day aimlessly cleaning her tiny apartment, rearranging books, and scrubbing grout, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from spiraling. Every time she closed her eyes, she pictured Greg's smug, handsome face, the pitying looks from their former friends, and Tiffany's triumphant smile. The old black dress lay on her bed like a shroud. At 4:30 p.m., her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She ignored it. It buzzed again, insistent. Annoyed, she answered with a clipped, "Hello? Ms. Benson, this is Antoine. I am a stylist. Mr. Maxwell has arranged for me to assist you with your preparations for this evening's gala. I am downstairs. Shall I come up?" Flora was speechless. A stylist? Mr. Maxwell had sent a stylist? I think there's been a mistake," she stammered. "No mistake, Miss Benson. I have a gown, shoes, and accessories. We have about 2 hours to make you look, as he put it, unforgettable. May I come up?" Stunned into compliance, Flora buzzed him in. Antoine was a whirlwind of Gallic energy, a small, impeccably dressed man with a critical eye and an air of absolute authority. He took one look at the black dress on her bed, made a sound of profound disgust, and immediately began unpacking a series of garment bags. He unveiled a gown of deep emerald silk that seemed to drink the light in the room. It was elegant, with a clean, classic cut that hinted at couture. It was more beautiful than anything she had ever worn, even in her life with Greg. "Mr. Maxwell has excellent taste," Antoine declared, holding the dress against her, "and a very good eye for size. Now let's see what we can do with this canvas." For the next 2 hours, Flora was plucked, painted, and polished. Antoine worked with the focused intensity of a master artist, transforming her tired, anxious reflection into someone she barely recognized. Her mousy brown hair was swept into a sophisticated chignon, revealing the elegant line of her neck. Her makeup was subtle yet transformative, highlighting her cheekbones and making her blue eyes appear larger and deeper. When she finally slipped into the silk gown, it fit as if it had been made for her. The woman in the mirror was poised, confident, and radiated a quiet power Flora hadn't felt in years. She looked expensive, untouchable, unforgettable. A knock at the door signaled the arrival of Mr. Maxwell's driver. As Flora thanked the miraculously efficient Antoine, a thought struck her. "Why did he do this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Antoine paused, his work complete. He gave her a small, knowing smile. "Mr. Maxwell believes that perception is reality, and tonight he wants the world to perceive you as formidable." The ride to the plaza was a blur of rain-streaked city lights. Flora's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror and a strange, burgeoning excitement. When the car pulled up to the grand entrance, a doorman opened her door, and she saw Landry Maxwell waiting for her under the awning. He was in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, a vision of dark elegance. But it was the look in his eyes that made her breath catch. He wasn't looking at her as an employer looks at an employee. His gaze swept over her once, a slow, appreciative appraisal that was entirely personal. "Benson," he said, his voice a low murmur as he offered his arm. "You look correct." Coming from him, it was the highest of compliments. She took his arm, the fine wool of his jacket solid and reassuring under her hand. "Thank you, Mr. Maxwell. For this," she gestured to herself. "It was unexpected." "Consider it a necessary investment for the evening's venture," he replied, his expression unreadable. He then guided her through the opulent lobby and towards the entrance of the ballroom. As they stood poised to enter, he paused and turned to her, his grip on her arm tightening ever so slightly. "Tonight," he said, his voice low and for her ears only, "you are not my assistant. You are my guest. We are attending this function together. If anyone asks, we have known each other for some time. I enjoy your company. Is that clear?" Flora's mind raced. What was he doing? Was this a test, or was it a kindness, a way to shield her? "Yes, Mr. Maxwell." "Landry," he corrected her gently. "Tonight, my name is Landry." He gave her a slight nod, and then they stepped through the archway and into the glittering ballroom. The immediate effect was dizzying, a wave of sound, music, laughter, the clinking of glasses washed over them. And then a wave of silence rippled out from where they stood. Heads turned. Conversations faltered. Everyone, it seemed, was staring at the reclusive billionaire Landry Maxwell and the stunning, unknown woman on his arm. Flora felt a blush creep up her neck, but Landry's presence was a fortress. He was completely unbothered by the attention, his gaze sweeping the room with an air of detached ownership. He was the sun, and everyone else was merely a planet caught in his orbit. For the first time, Flora understood the true nature of his power. It wasn't just his money, it was the impenetrable aura of confidence that surrounded him. And for tonight, she was safely inside it. Navigating the ballroom on Landry Maxwell's arm was like parting the Red Sea. Whispers followed them like the train of a gown, a chorus of, "Who is she?" and "I've never seen him with anyone." Landry ignored it all, guiding Flora with a steady hand at the small of her back toward the main bar. The touch was light, professional, yet it sent a surprising jolt of warmth through the silk of her dress. "Champagne?" he asked, his voice a calm island in the sea of noise. "Please," she managed, her throat still tight. He procured 2 flutes from a passing waiter with an effortless gesture. He handed one to her, his fingers brushing against hers. "The key to these events," he said, his eyes scanning the crowd, "is to never stand still for too long. It invites unwanted conversation. And always have a drink in your hand. It provides you with a prop and a plausible reason to end a conversation." It was the most practical and perhaps the most useful piece of social advice she'd ever received. She took a sip of the champagne, the cold bubbles a welcome shock to her system. For a few minutes, they simply stood together, a silent, elegant tableau. He didn't force conversation, and for that, she was grateful. He seemed to understand that she needed a moment to acclimate, to build up her armor. Then, she saw them. Greg and Tiffany were holding court near a massive floral arrangement, laughing with a group of people Flora had once called friends. Greg looked handsome and smug in his tuxedo, his arm possessively around Tiffany's waist. Tiffany was wearing a fire-engine red dress that was both expensive and obvious, designed to command attention. It was working. Flora's heart gave a painful lurch. Her hand tightened on her champagne flute. Landry, without looking at her, seemed to sense the shift. "Who are we avoiding?" he asked quietly. 11 o'clock. Man in the Brioni tux, woman in the red dress. Landry's gaze flickered in their direction. There was no discernible change in his expression, but Flora felt the subtle pressure of his hand increase at her back. "Gregory Shaw," he said, a statement, not a question. "Shaw Capital." Flora's eyes widened. "You know him?" "I know of him," Landry corrected. "We were competing for the Omnicorp acquisition last spring. He's ambitious." The way he said the word made it sound like an insult. Before Flora could process this, the inevitable happened. One of their old friends, a woman named Portia, spotted her. Her eyes widened in surprise, and she immediately leaned over to whisper in Greg's ear. Flora watched in slow motion as Greg turned, his casual smile freezing on his face. His eyes found Flora, then slid to the man beside her. The smile vanished completely, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. He disentangled himself from Tiffany and started moving towards them, a predator closing in on unexpected prey. "Here we go," Flora breathed, her entire body tensing. "Relax," Landry murmured, his voice a low vibration against her back. "Let him come to us. Remember the objective. Project Indifference." Greg stopped a few feet away, his gaze flicking between them. Tiffany trailed behind him, her expression a mask of catty curiosity. "Flora," Greg said, his voice smooth but laced with an undercurrent of something sharp and unpleasant. "Well, this is a surprise. I didn't think this was your kind of scene anymore." The insult was clear. "You can't afford to be here." Flora lifted her chin. "People change, Greg. You should know." His eyes narrowed slightly before he turned his attention to Landry, extending a hand. "Gregory Shaw. I don't believe we've been properly introduced." Landry looked at the offered hand for a fraction of a second before taking it in a firm, brief grip. Landry Maxwell. The name landed with the force of a physical blow. Greg's bravado faltered. He knew the name, of course. Everyone in their world knew that name. Landry Maxwell wasn't just rich. He was in a different stratosphere of wealth and influence. Greg was a successful banker. Landry was an architect of the future. "Maxwell?" Greg repeated, recovering quickly. "Of Maxwell Innovations. Of course. Impressive work you're doing in AI." He turned back to Flora, a condescending smile playing on his lips. "And how do you two—" He let the question hang in the air, weighted with insinuation. This was the moment. The precipice. Flora's mind went blank. All her rehearsed lines, all the cool, indifferent phrases she'd imagined, evaporated under the heat of Greg's smug stare. He was waiting for her to crumble, to admit she was just someone's assistant, a glorified secretary who had gotten lucky enough to be invited. The silence stretched, becoming painfully thin. Greg's smile widened. He had her. And then, from the deepest, most wounded part of her soul, the lie was born. It was pure, primal instinct, a desperate act of self-preservation. "Greg, Tiffany," she said, her voice impossibly calm. She took a small step closer to Landry, closing the final inch of space between them. She felt the solid wall of his chest against her shoulder. "This is my boyfriend, Landry." The words hung in the air, shimmering and unbelievable. Tiffany's perfectly sculpted eyebrows shot up toward her hairline. Greg's face went rigid, the color draining from his cheeks. He stared at Landry, then at Flora, then back again, his mind visibly struggling to compute this impossible reality. Flora held her breath, waiting for Landry to expose her, to laugh, to politely correct her delusion. Instead, she felt his arm slide from her back to circle her waist, pulling her firmly against his side. The gesture was possessive, definitive. He looked down at her with a soft expression she had never seen before, a look of private affection that was so convincing it made her own heart skip a beat. Then he looked at Greg, his grey eyes turning to chips of ice. "A pleasure to finally meet the man I've heard so much about," Landry said, his voice smooth as silk and sharp as a razor. The second shot had been fired, and it was a direct hit. Greg stood there, utterly silenced, his face a thunderous mask of disbelief and wounded pride. The game had just changed, and Flora, armed with the most powerful man in the room, had just taken the lead. The rest of the evening unfolded like a surreal dream. News of Flora's new boyfriend spread through the ballroom at the speed of gossip. She found herself being reintroduced to people who had cut her out of their lives months ago. Their smiles were suddenly warm, their interest in her life suddenly keen. It was a nauseating, yet undeniably satisfying display of social climbing. Through it all, Landry was the consummate partner. He kept a steadying hand on her, steered her through treacherous conversations, and fielded questions about their relationship, with a vague but charming narrative about a chance meeting at an art gallery and a shared passion for modern sculpture. He was a masterful liar. Flora watched Greg from across the room. He was no longer the center of attention. He stood with a rigid posture, a glass of scotch clutched in his hand, his eyes following their every move. The smug confidence had been replaced by a simmering, volcanic anger. He was losing control, and he hated it. Later in the evening, Landry was pulled away by a board member of the foundation, leaving Flora alone for the first time. She sought refuge on a small, secluded terrace overlooking the park, the cool night air a welcome relief from the stuffy ballroom. The distant sounds of the city were a soothing hum. She closed her eyes for a moment, the emotional exhaustion of the night washing over her. The lie was a heavy cloak, and she was beginning to feel its weight. "You know, I almost feel sorry for you." Flora's eyes snapped open. Greg was standing in the doorway to the terrace, blocking her only exit. He'd discarded his empty glass and his public smile. His expression was cold and hard. "What do you want, Greg?" she asked, her voice weary. He walked toward her, his steps slow and menacing. "I want to know what this game is. What are you paying him, or is it the other way around? Did you really fall so far that you have to sell yourself to the highest bidder?" The words were designed to hurt, and they did. They struck at the very core of her insecurities. "You're pathetic," she shot back, her voice trembling slightly. "No, you're pathetic," he sneered, getting closer. "Did you really think you could fool me? You, with Landry Maxwell? A man who could have any woman in the world, and he picks a washed-up, divorced assistant. It's laughable. You hired him. He's an escort. It's the only explanation." Tears of rage and humiliation pricked at her eyes. "Get away from me." "Or what?" he challenged, his voice dropping to a vicious whisper. "You'll have your paid-for boyfriend throw me out? He's probably already cashed the check. You're nothing, Flora. You were nothing when we were married, and you're nothing now. You could never land a man like that. Who are you kidding?" Her composure finally shattered. A single tear escaped and traced a hot path down her cheek. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but only a choked sob emerged. She was broken. He had won. "Is there a problem here?" Landry's voice cut through the darkness, calm and lethally quiet. He was standing right behind Greg. He must have seen the confrontation from the ballroom and followed them out. His face was unreadable, a mask of cold fury. Greg turned, startled, but quickly recovered his swagger. "Just having a private conversation with my ex-wife. Nothing that concerns you, Maxwell." Landry ignored him completely. His eyes were fixed on Flora, on the tear track glistening on her cheek. His jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. He took a step forward, placing himself between Flora and her ex-husband. He looked from Greg's sneering face back to Flora's devastated one. The air on the terrace crackled with tension. Then he did something Flora could never have predicted. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her jaw, his thumb stroking away the tear. His touch was surprisingly tender. He held her gaze for a heartbeat, a silent communication passing between them. He looked back at Greg, a flicker of something dangerous in his eyes. "Does this look like a lie to you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. And then he lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle, reassuring peck. It wasn't a chaste, theatrical gesture. It was a kiss of searing, undeniable possession. It was deep and hot and absolute, a flag planted on conquered territory. It was a calculated detonation, designed to obliterate all doubt, to silence every whisper, to end the war in a single, breathtaking strike. His lips were firm and demanding, and for a dizzying moment, Flora forgot they were on a terrace, forgot who Greg was, forgot that any of it was a lie. She responded instinctively, her hand coming up to grip the lapel of his tuxedo as the world spun away. He held the kiss for a long, charged moment before pulling back slowly. Her lips tingled, her mind reeling. He didn't look at her. His cold, triumphant gaze was locked on Greg. He let his hand drop from her face and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. Without another word, he turned and led her off the terrace, walking straight past her ex-husband as if he were nothing more than a piece of furniture. He left Gregory Shaw standing alone in the darkness, his face a portrait of stunned, utter humiliation. The war was over, and the fallout was just beginning. The ride back in Landry's town car was a study in suffocating silence. The soft leather of the seats, the quiet hum of the engine, the rain-slicked streets gliding past the tinted windows, it all seemed to amplify the unspoken tension between them. Flora sat rigidly on her side of the spacious cabin, her mind a frantic, replaying loop of the kiss. She could still feel the shocking pressure of his lips, the possessive grip of his hand. It had felt more real than anything in her life had for the past year. She was mortified. She was an employee who had not only lied at a corporate function, but had dragged her CEO, her billionaire, untouchable CEO, into the lie. And he had, for reasons she couldn't begin to fathom, escalated it to a point of no return. The car pulled up in front of her modest apartment building. The driver remained in his seat, clearly under instructions to wait. The engine idled, a quiet thrum in the night. She started, her voice raspy. "I am so sorry, Mr. Maxwell. I don't know what to say. I never should have said that. It was unprofessional and impulsive, and I've put you in an impossible position. I will, of course, tender my resignation in the morning." Landry didn't look at her. He stared straight ahead, at the rain hitting the windshield. "Don't be ridiculous, Benson. You're the most efficient assistant I've ever had. I have no intention of accepting your resignation. But what you did, he said, finally turning to face her, his expression unreadable in the dim light of the car, was tactically brilliant. Ill-advised, but brilliant. Flora stared at him, bewildered. Brilliant? Gregory Shaw has been a thorn in my side for over a year, Landry explained, his voice even and matter-of-fact. His firm, Shaw Capital, actively works to undermine my acquisitions. He used underhanded tactics to poach 2 of my senior developers last quarter, and he outbid me on the Omnicorp deal by leveraging information that I suspect was obtained unethically. He paused, his gaze intense. Seeing the look on his face tonight when he realized you were with me, that was a professional satisfaction I would have paid a great deal to experience. Flora's mind was spinning. This wasn't about her. It was about his rivalry with Greg. She had been a pawn, a convenient, well-dressed weapon in a war she didn't even know was being fought. The realization was both a relief and a sting. "So the kiss," she whispered, "was a strategic maneuver designed to consolidate our position and demoralize the opposition," he finished, his tone clinical. "And it worked." He let that sink in before continuing. "However, it has created a new set of circumstances we need to manage. The story is already out. By morning, the gossip columns will be buzzing. A public, messy retraction now would be inconvenient. For both of us. It would make you look foolish and, by extension, it would make me look foolish for associating with you. I don't like looking foolish." He shifted in his seat, turning his body fully toward her. This was no longer a conversation. It was a negotiation. "So I have a proposition for you, Benson. A new addendum to your employment duties, if you will." She waited, her heart thumping a slow, heavy rhythm. "We continue the charade," he said simply. "Publicly, we are a couple. We attend several key events together over the next 3 months. We are seen, we are photographed. At the end of that period, we have a quiet, amicable breakup. No drama. By then, the story will have run its course. In the interim, you will have neutralized the threat of your ex-husband, and I will have a convenient social shield from the endless parade of women my board of directors tries to set me up with. It is mutually beneficial." Flora was stunned. He wanted to keep pretending. "You can't be serious." "I am always serious," he replied. "This is a business arrangement. You will be compensated for your time and the emotional labor involved. I will add a $50,000 bonus to your salary, prorated over the 3 months, for your services as my public-facing partner. We will establish clear ground rules. All interactions are for public consumption only. In private, our relationship remains strictly that of an employer and employee. Do you agree to the terms?" $50,000. It was more money than she had in the world. It was enough to pay off the last of the crippling debt Greg had left her with. It was freedom. It was a chance to finally, truly start over. And all she had to do was pretend to be the girlfriend of one of the most powerful and attractive men she had ever met, all while publicly humiliating the man who had destroyed her life. The devil's bargain was on the table. She thought of Greg's cruel words on the terrace. "You're nothing." She thought of the pitying looks, the condescending smiles. She thought of the freedom that money would buy her. Then she looked at Landry Maxwell, at his sharp, intelligent eyes, and saw not a savior, but an ally. A powerful, dangerous ally. "Yes," Flora said, her voice clear and firm. "I agree to the terms." A slow, satisfied smile touched Landry's lips. It was a rare sight, and it changed his entire face. "Excellent. Our first official engagement is the Bainbridge Gallery opening on Thursday. My driver will pick you up at 7:30. He extended his hand. "Welcome to the partnership, Flora." She shook his hand. His grip was firm, his skin warm. It was no longer the hand of her boss. It was the hand of her co-conspirator. The contract was sealed not with ink, but with a handshake in the dark, rain-swept quiet of a New York night. The following weeks were a whirlwind of dizzying artifice. Flora's life bifurcated into two distinct realities. By day, she was the efficient, almost invisible Flora Benson, executive assistant, managing Landry Maxwell's complex schedule, fielding his calls and preparing his briefs. She was professional, respectful, and kept her distance. But by night, she was Flora Benson, the enigmatic new love in the billionaire's life. Landry, true to his word, treated it like a meticulously planned business campaign. Their dates were carefully selected for maximum public impact: a front-row appearance at a high-profile fashion show, a quiet dinner at a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a sign, and the aforementioned gallery opening. The Bainbridge Gallery was a cavern of white walls and stark, modern art. Paparazzi flashes erupted as they stepped out of the car. Landry's hand immediately found the small of her back, a familiar, steadying pressure. He guided her through the throng with the ease of a man who was used to being the center of attention. Inside, he played the part of the devoted boyfriend, flawlessly. He would lean in to whisper a comment about a painting in her ear, his breath warm against her skin. He'd fetch her a glass of wine, his fingers brushing hers as he passed it to her. To the outside world, they looked like a genuine couple. But as soon as they were back in the car, the performance would end. The hand would retreat. The warm smiles would fade. He would become Mr. Maxwell again, discussing the next day's schedule while she, Flora, would stare out the window, her heart beating a little too fast from a performance that was starting to feel disturbingly real. The lie began to seep into her. The confidence she projected on these nights started to follow her home. She walked a little taller, spoke with more authority. Her friend, Sophie, was ecstatic. "I don't care if it's real or not," she'd said over coffee. Greg's face must be permanently stuck in a look of sour disbelief. "You, my friend, have won the breakup lottery." What Sophie didn't see were the quiet, complicated moments that were happening away from the cameras. One evening, while waiting for a driver after a charity dinner, it began to rain. Landry, without a word, took off his tuxedo jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The fabric was warm and smelled faintly of his expensive cologne. It was a simple, gentlemanly act, but it felt deeply personal. Another time, at his penthouse preparing for an event, she'd pricked her finger on a pin from the new dress he'd had sent for her. She gasped, and he was at her side in an instant, his brow furrowed with genuine concern. He took her finger, examined the tiny wound with intense focus, and then, inexplicably, lifted it to his lips, stopping just short of touching her skin. The moment hung between them, charged and electric, before he seemed to remember himself and abruptly dropped her hand to go find a bandage. She was also beginning to see the man behind the myth. She discovered he had a dry, wicked sense of humor that only appeared when they were alone. She learned he was a voracious reader of history and could speak 3 languages fluently. She saw the immense pressure he was under, the weight of an empire resting squarely on his shoulders. He wasn't just a cold, calculating machine. He was a lonely man living in a gilded cage. Her feelings were becoming a tangled, dangerous mess. The fake affection was bleeding into real admiration. The pretend chemistry was igniting a very real spark. She was falling for her boss, for her fake boyfriend, for the man who had signed a contract to be with her. It was a disastrous, unprofessional, and utterly thrilling complication. Meanwhile, Greg was not taking his defeat gracefully. He was becoming unhinged. He sent Flora a string of increasingly desperate texts, alternating between angry accusations and pathetic pleas for her to talk to him. He was digging, trying to find a crack in their story. Flora knew it was only a matter of time before he did something drastic. The breaking point came one rainy Tuesday night. Flora was working late, alone in the quiet of the 50th floor office. Landry was in a late meeting. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. It contained a single attachment, a photo. It was a picture of Landry, looking younger, standing on a yacht. His arm was around a beautiful, raven-haired woman. They were both smiling, the picture of happiness. The caption below the photo read, "Heard of Isabelle Dubois? Ask your new boyfriend what happened to his last fiancée." Some stories don't have happy endings. Flora's blood ran cold. The text had to be from Greg. He had found something. A fiancée, a woman Landry had never once mentioned. A knot of ice formed in her stomach. Who was Isabelle Dubois? And what had Landry Maxwell done to her? The carefully constructed fantasy she had been living in suddenly felt fragile enough to shatter with a single touch. The picture on her phone was a ghost, a smiling spectre from a past she never knew existed. Flora lay awake all night, the city lights outside her window, doing nothing to chase away the darkness that had flooded her mind. She scrolled through her own photos from the past few weeks, a gallery of their carefully constructed lie. There was a candid shot someone had snapped of them at the gallery opening, Landry leaning in to whisper something to her, a genuine smile on his face. There was another from a charity dinner, his hand resting on her back, a gesture of easy intimacy. Each image, once a source of thrilling, complicated joy, was now tainted. Was that smile a performance? Was that touch a strategic maneuver? The memory of him draping his warm jacket over her shoulders on a rainy night now felt less like a kindness and more like a calculated move by a master strategist. Greg's poison had found fertile ground in her own insecurities. The text message echoed in her head. Ask your new boyfriend what happened to his last fiancée. The word fiancée felt like a betrayal, a crucial piece of data he had intentionally withheld. Their entire arrangement was a business contract, yes, but its foundation was a shared goal of authenticity in the public eye. How could she project a truth that was built on a secret of this magnitude? The next morning, the 50th floor office felt like a pressurized cabin. The air was thin and crackled with unspoken tension. She prepared Landry's morning coffee. Black, 2 sugars, a routine she could perform in her sleep, but her movements were stiff, robotic. When she placed the porcelain cup on his desk, the sound was unnaturally loud in the silence. "Is there a problem, Flora?" he asked, his attention fixed on a document he was signing. He had started using her first name in private a week ago, a subtle shift in their dynamic that had felt like a victory. "No, Mr. Maxwell," she replied. The formal address was a shield, a wall she threw up instantly. She saw his hand pause, the pen hovering over the paper. He was a man who missed nothing, and he had certainly not missed that. Slowly, he set the pen down and looked up. His grey eyes, usually so quick and analytical, were searching, trying to diagnose the fault in the system. "We agreed on Landry," he said, his voice even. "And we agreed on a degree of transparency, at least concerning the terms of our arrangement. Something is wrong. I've come to recognize your tells. Your posture is rigid, and you haven't made eye contact once this morning. What is it?" The calm, rational way he was dissecting her emotional state only fueled her anger. This wasn't a logistics problem to be solved. This was a breach of trust. She couldn't hold it in. Her hands trembling slightly, she pulled out her phone, opened the haunting photograph, and placed it on the polished expanse of his desk, pushing it toward him. "Who is Isabelle Dubois?" she asked, her voice tight and sharp with hurt. The effect was instantaneous and chilling. Landry's face went perfectly still, all micro-expressions ceasing. It was as if a marble statue had replaced the man. The warmth and faint amusement that had recently begun to color his features vanished, leaving only the cold, hard control of the CEO she had first met. He stared at the smiling faces in the photo, and for a moment, the silence in the room was absolute. "Where did you get this?" he finally asked, his voice a low, dangerous murmur that vibrated with controlled fury. "My ex-husband seems to have taken up investigative journalism as a hobby," she shot back, unable to keep the bitterness from her tone. "He thought I should be aware of your history." Landry leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning in protest. He steepled his fingers, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond the city skyline. He looked older in that moment, weary, as if the photograph had resurrected a ghost he had long since buried. "This was a long time ago," he said, his voice distant. "She was your fiancée," Flora stated. It wasn't a question. She wanted to hear him admit it, to confirm the shape and weight of the secret. He finally brought his gaze back to her, and for the first time, she saw past the layers of power and control. In the depths of his eyes, she saw a flicker of a deep, ancient wound. Yes, he admitted quietly. She was. He saw the accusation in her expression, the pain of being a pawn in a game whose rules she never fully knew. He let out a long, slow breath. My relationship with Isabelle, it ended before my company became what it is today. Before the world was watching my every move. It was a private matter. It doesn't feel very private when your rival is using it as a weapon against me, Flora countered, her voice shaking. He nodded, conceding the point. He stood, walking to the vast floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked his kingdom of glass and steel, his back to her. "You deserve the truth," he said to the window. "The whole truth." He began to speak, the story spilling out of him in clipped, precise sentences, as if he were recounting the details of a failed merger. "I met Isabelle at a tech conference in Geneva. She was a lead engineer for a rival company, Cygnus Tech. She was brilliant, captivating. I was younger then, more trusting. I pursued her for months. When she finally agreed to work for me, to join Maxwell Innovations, I thought it was the biggest coup of my career. It was, just not in the way I imagined." He turned around, his face a mask of grim memory. "I fell in love with her. We were engaged for 6 months. I gave her everything, my trust, my future, and a level 4 security clearance that gave her access to the architecture of Project Chimera, our flagship AI platform. It was my life's work at the time." He walked back to his desk but didn't sit. He leaned against it, a portrait of constrained energy. 2 weeks before our wedding, I came home to an empty apartment. She was gone. No note, no call, just vanished. A week after that, Cygnus Tech held a press conference. They announced their new AI platform, Helios. It was a direct, perfect copy of Chimera, beating us to market by a full year. The technology she had helped me build, it almost bankrupted me. The public humiliation was immense. Flora felt the air leave her lungs. This was not a story of a simple broken heart. It was a tale of devastating, catastrophic betrayal. The woman I was going to marry, Landry continued, his voice dropping, hadn't just left me. She had been playing me from the moment we met. She was a corporate spy. He looked at Flora, his eyes holding hers, willing her to understand. And the primary investor who funded Cygnus Tech's sudden expansion, the man who made a fortune off of what Isabel stole from me, was Gregory Shaw. The final piece clicked into place with sickening finality. It all made sense now. The rivalry, the depth of his animosity for Greg, his willingness to engage in her desperate lie. It was never just about business. It was about avenging the most profound betrayal of his life, and she had been the perfect, unwitting instrument. And me? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Was I just the right woman, with the right ex-husband, in the right place at the right time? He looked at her, his expression raw with an honesty that stripped him bare. That's what it was when it started, he admitted, the words costing him. It was a contract, a simple, mutually beneficial arrangement, an opportunity for a revenge I had stopped believing I would ever get. He took a step toward her, closing some of the vast space between them. It's not simple anymore, Flora. These past few weeks, working with you, talking with you, seeing your resilience, your humor, your intelligence, it stopped being a performance for me a long time ago. The lie became a routine, and the routine started to feel more real than anything else. He gave a short, humorless laugh. The problem is, I don't know how to operate outside the terms of a contract. Rules, objectives, deliverables. That's the language I understand. This is a language I've forgotten how to speak. His confession hung in the air, a breathtaking admission of vulnerability from a man who had none. He was lost, and so was she. The truth, instead of clarifying things, had only made them infinitely more complex. She had started this charade to heal her own wounded pride, but now she was tangled in the unhealed wounds of the man she was coming to realize she loved. The final 2 weeks of their contract passed in a haze of fragile, unspoken understanding. The tension was gone, replaced by a quiet, careful tenderness. The final, official event was a fundraiser at the Museum of Natural History, a place of ancient bones and silent histories. As they entered the grand hall, the colossal model of the blue whale suspended above them seemed to underscore the weight of the moment. Flora knew a choice had to be made. She saw Greg across the room, talking with a small group, a smug, knowing look on his face. He was watching them, waiting for the implosion he believed he had engineered. He thought he had won. Under the shadow of the great whale, surrounded by the ghosts of millennia, Landry turned to her. The noise of the party seemed to fade away. "Our contract is officially over tonight," he said, his voice low and formal, a retreat to the safety of their old dynamic. "I will, of course, wire the final payment to your account tomorrow." "I don't care about the money," she said, her voice shaking slightly. She looked up at him, at this brilliant, wounded, and extraordinary man who saw the world in terms of transactions, and her heart ached with a fierce, protective love. She thought of her old life, a life spent accommodating, pleasing, and shrinking herself to fit into someone else's world. She wouldn't do that anymore. Reaching out, she straightened his perfectly knotted tie, a gesture so simple so intimate, it felt more real than any of their public kisses. He looked down at her hand, then back at her face, his eyes full of questions. "This part isn't in the contract, Landry," she whispered. Then, before her courage could fail, she rose on her toes, and in front of the fossils and the financiers, in front of her stunned ex-husband, she kissed him. It was not a kiss for show or for revenge. It was quiet, tender, and filled with a terrifying, breathtaking truth. It was a new clause, a new agreement, written not on paper, but in the silent language of the heart. He was still for a fraction of a second, a moment of pure shock. And then he responded. His arms came around her waist, pulling her flush against him, as if he were afraid she might disappear. He deepened the kiss, a confirmation, an acceptance, a new beginning. Across the room, Gregory Shaw watched the scene unfold. He saw not a performance, but a profound, undeniable connection. He watched as the woman he had underestimated and the man he had wronged rewrote their own history together. With a look of final, bitter defeat, he turned and disappeared into the crowd. Flora and Landry pulled apart slowly, the universe shrinking to the space between them. They were no longer a boss and an assistant. They were no longer parties to a contract. They were just two people who had found an astonishingly real love in the most artificial of circumstances, finally stepping out of the shadows of their pasts and into a future they would write together. From the ashes of a painful divorce, a desperate lie was born. But what started as a woman's attempt to reclaim her pride at a party became a journey that neither she nor her millionaire boss could have ever anticipated. They built a relationship on a foundation of secrets and a business contract, only to discover that the most profound truths are often found in the most unexpected places. Flora didn't just win the breakup. She found a partner who saw her for who she truly was, not who she pretended to be. Their story reminds us that sometimes you have to fake it until you become it, and that the best love stories are the ones that are never written down in a contract. What did you think of Flora's bold move? Was it a stroke of genius or a recipe for disaster? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of drama, revenge, and unexpected love, please hit that like button, share it with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories every week. Thanks for listening.